Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking a look at Pioneers of Pagonia, an extremely exciting upcoming city builder that was only recently announced and that I've been pumped for since that early first look. I've had a chance to play the game myself now after having sit down with the designer behind the game at Gamescom earlier this year, and this is the same man who gave us the original Settler series, and it's clear that he's super passionate about bringing us this spiritual successor. If you like city builders with complex production chains and management aspects, this is definitely one to look out for, and with the help of timestamps down below, I'll explain exactly why. Let's begin. Insane scale and Wuselfaktor. Right off the bat, as nearly 200 people file off your ship onto your new island home, you'll notice that the game doesn't mess around with its sense of scale. Each individual member of your fledgling city is simulated, and with things starting at a population of about 200, you can imagine just how intense it all gets with growth and expansion over time. I was introduced to the concept of Wuselfaktor when I was speaking to the devs at Gamescom. I apologize for butchering the pronunciation there, I do not speak German, but either way, it's not a term I'd heard before, but one I realize I've always cared deeply about when it's come to city building games in particular. It refers to the general hustle and bustle of a city, and it's what gives life to city builders. Seeing all the little people milling about going about their day, that's Wuselfaktor. Seeing cars go from point to point in a more modern city builder, that's Wuselfaktor. It's present in any good city builder, but with Pioneers of Pagonia, it's a driving principle, and you can see it quite clearly right from the beginning. These aren't tiny dots going from building to building. Each individual has a job and life, and each individual goes about their day fulfilling tasks in the interest of both. That involves watching them leave their homes, watching them pick up goods, watching them process goods, watching them, grab a meal, so on and so forth. Now, multiply that by hundreds, and all of a sudden, even when zoomed out, the city just feels so alive. On the topic of zooming out, if you really pull back, the scale gets even more impressive as you can see hundreds upon hundreds of buildings spread across over thousands of square meters. The demo and the build I was playing was a little limited, so to speak, allowing me to only place about 150 buildings, with smaller ones not really counting as individuals, so realistically it was closer to 200 or 250 buildings in this demo build. The build also limited my expansion to 120,000 square meters, not including the starting region itself. Take a look at the screen right now. This, as indicated by the top left corner, is just about 20% of the entire island on display. The area claimed by my borders, just about 7%. Look at the size of the buildings, the people. Cities will be absolutely massive at their fullest, and the build I saw at Gamescom felt a fair sight bigger, though we'll have to wait for release before we can truly get a sense of scale there, I think. Either way, one of the first things you need to do is push out from your humble starting location to secure access to additional vital resources. The method here will be familiar to some of you, as placing a guard tower will employ a bunch of guards to go out and physically push your borders out, while placing an explorer's hut will push back the fog of war to help you plan your expansion based on what you need most urgently. You can direct both these structures to make sure they're focusing in the right direction, but of course they have limited radiuses within which they operate, meaning you'll need to keep pushing them further and further outward if you want to keep exploring and expanding further and further. Guard towers, as the name implies, will have the additional mechanic of defending your people from trouble when those mechanics eventually get added to the game. The demo had easy maps where things were readily available, and harder ones where some vital resources were just out of reach, and generally speaking, you'll want to make an effort to explore and expand as quickly as possible to edge out any competitors on the island. While the demo didn't have enemies, the full game will, and while the demo used pre-generated islands, the full game will use random generation to make sure each playthrough requires engaging in those mechanics. With expansion comes the need to manage the flow of resources and people alike, as each resource, and as described earlier, each person, is individually simulated. This means that if your tavern needs some venison, for example, and the closest market from which to buy it is at the very edge of the tavern's reach, the cook is going to have to travel all the way over and back before they can start cooking. Similarly, if all your builders live in the center of town, it'll take forever for buildings at your outskirts to get built, and so you start to create little hubs around resource nodes to ensure you're able to acquire what you need, building up little satellite settlements and funneling resources appropriately. Terrain can only be modified to a slight degree, taking time to flatten before a building can be erected, so often you'll find yourself navigating meandering paths through mountains and hillsides and working with rather organic road and placement systems to create a town that feels believable and alive, but consequentially takes time to do anything in. There's a beauty in that here, and it completely changes the pace and vibe of things as you push for efficiency in all matters. It's especially compelling because of the sheer number of options. Goods and resources. Before you begin to establish yourself on the island, it's nothing but a dock and raw resources for you to harness. You look around to find a good spot to start settling down, and you think, oh neat, some trees. I definitely need wood. Let me put down a woodcutter and they'll cut down some wood, right? Wrong. Well, sort of. Look a little closer, and you'll notice that there is hardwood and softwood, which means, by extension, there are processed versions of hardwood and softwood, hardwood boards and softwood beams. There's also firewood harvested when you cut down trees. This is just one of the many natural resources your people will be harvesting, processing, and using for various purposes. The top bar shows us a variety of categories beyond wood, but don't be fooled by the UI here. There are more subcategories than first meet the eye. Stone, for example, comes as stone, border stone, cut stone, limestone, and cement. Mining gets you copper, coal, iron ore, and iron bars. Silver ore and silver bars are the rare resources, with silver coins, copper coins, rubies, emeralds, and diamonds being the valuables, presumably for your wealthy elite and for trade, a feature that isn't in the demo but will be coming in the released game. Natural products include rations for your explorers, water for your foresters and farmers, cloth, rope, leather, flax, wheat, flour, and wooden cogwheels? I didn't know they grew in the wild, to be honest, and they'll probably be recategorized as a wood product in an updated build. Moving on, there's 3 kinds of meat between rabbit, boar, and deer, and 6 plant-based food items: raspberries, porcini, pumpkin, cabbage, corn, and bread. There's a multitude of tools, without which your citizens can't actually do the various jobs, so you'll be preparing everything from shovels to knives to chisels to pliers and hunting bows. Weapons are similar, with everything from wooden spears to bronze swords and iron lances and staffs of various kind, and even a magic torch. Yes, this is a fantasy setting. As mentioned before, war and fighting isn't in the current build, but it's planned for the game, and clearly it's nothing to scoff at. Heck, there is armor variety too: shields, chainmail, robes of various kinds. There's a ton of resources, whether raw or processed, and that means there are a ton of production chains. Not only that, but the resources for these production chains, as described earlier, need to be moved physically from place to place, meaning positioning your storage facilities and assigning them appropriately is paramount to the smooth operation of your city. And therein lies the ultimate challenge. Simply, can you do a good job? Or rather, how good a job can you do? I'm a sucker for this kind of thing. I love the Anno games and Workers and Resources Soviet Republic for this very reason. This level of complexity and the need to think about the knock-on effect of inefficiencies in your supply chain is just so fun to me. Do goods need to travel too far? Are population centers not properly distributed? So on and so forth. All become significantly more important concerns when there are 10 times as many to think about. But that's enough about resources, raw and processed. Let's talk about where the processing actually happens, because there's certainly no lack of buildings and workers. Spread across 8 categories, apart from 8 buildings that are not available in the current version of the game, there's a bunch of different structures that all, of course, do a variety of things. There are resource gathering structures, resource processing structures, structures related to just living in a city, and structures for storage. Eventually, there will be military buildings and trade buildings too, but again, not for this current build. Building a structure is a multi-step process. First, depending on how even the chosen spot is, diggers come through with their shovels to flatten the terrain out. Then, the required construction materials get brought over, and builders come through with their hammers to actually build the thing. It takes time, especially early on in a playthrough when all the raw materials need to be taken off the ship and hauled all the way over to the construction sites, and the tools need to be picked up from the ship too. Eventually, you can build construction camps to house builders, diggers, and carriers who will specifically focus on construction sites, and you can supplement them with housing where people return to and leave from when going to work. Reducing the distance between a work site and where the associated worker comes from, as you might imagine, has a direct impact on efficiency. Once built, all structures typically need workers, who need a variety of tools and weapons or resources in general to do their work. You can tell buildings which workers should or should not be showing up to work there in what quantities, and if it's the type of building that acquires raw materials or produces goods, you'll be able to tell it what to focus on. So, for example, if you're in desperate need of hardwood planks, you can tell your forester to plant only hardwood trees, your woodcutter to only cut down said hardwood trees, and your sawmill to only process hardwood logs into hardwood planks. Heck, if you want to specify where any one of these workers should focus, you can do that too, though keep in mind that pretty much every building has a radius within which it operates. Similar options exist for quarries and stonemasons and mines, and even at taverns where nutritious meals and comfort meals are 2 different things, with the latter ensuring more baby making for an ever-growing city and population. something which at times you might want to limit if you've reached your maximum output of necessary resources. The intertwining of buildings, workers, and goods is always fun. Guard towers, as described earlier, will help expand your territory with the help of guards and border stones, while explorers' huts need rations. Though of course you need backpacks for a citizen to actually become an explorer in the first place. And how do you produce backpacks? Well, at the Leatherworker, a building we don't actually have access to in this build, so let's skip instead to the Tavern, also a fairly basic early building. The cooks inside need resources to cook with, as discussed before, and they need to be trained at a guild hall, and in order to do that, the guild hall needs knives to train them with. Knives are made at the toolsmith using a variety of resources. Hardwood boards need woodcutters, sawmills, and hardwood trees. Coal and copper need to be mined. Iron bars, well, you get those at the smelting works. But to make iron bars, you need iron ore and coal, and to get iron ore and coal, you need coal huts and iron huts. But who works at a mine? Well, miners. They yearn for the mines, but they need pickaxes, and who makes pickaxes? You guessed it, the toolsmith. Naturally, the full game will have access to trade features so you can acquire resources you run out of, and you can always, of course, reassign workers between your buildings if you find yourself limited. But you can see just how easily you can kind of trap yourself if you're not staying cognizant of your gradually developing city's needs. Either way, looking at some other options over here, you can see mints make coins, weaving sheds make rope and clothes and robes, bakers bake bread with the flour ground at windmills that need wheat grown on farmlands tended to by crop farms. I could list countless complex chains because they really just feel endless. With such a huge variety of buildings comes a huge variety of occupations for your people, divided into craftsmen trained at the guild hall, military units trained at the military academy or the arcane academy if they're sorcerers, and tradespeople whose training we'll learn more about in a later build when trade actually becomes available. And of course, anybody who doesn't have one of the jobs above can work as a construction worker, a digger, or a carrier to keep your city growing. Pioneers of Pagonia is feeling like a fantastic little gem with a great degree of complexity already in place with objectives, conflict and combat, economic systems, trade, and procedural map generation planned for its early access release later this year. After that, we can expect to see additional objectives, new types of resources like fish and diamond and the associated jobs and buildings that come with them, as well as whole new systems like subsurface mining. Co-op is also in the works, which sounds like it would be really fun, and of course, there's going to be plenty more throughout early access. If you think Pioneers of Pagonia is for you, don't hesitate to wishlist the game as a great way to show the developers you're interested. It helps indie developers especially because of how Steam works, and I'm sure it's a great motivator. Apart from that, if you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like button, and if you want more strategy, sim, and city building content in your life, you should consider subscribing. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.